Well, hello everyone, very good afternoon to you and a very warm welcome to our online discussion about hybrid leadership organised by GoodHabitz. Let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Emma Crosby. I'm a UK TV journalist based here in London. We're enjoying some gorgeous spring sunshine right now and I'm delighted to be your host over the next hour that we have together. Thank you very, very much for your time. Now, before we start, a quick comment on questions. There is a tab where you can ask your questions to be answered during our Q&A. Fingers crossed you can see that tab on your screen right now. And if you're experiencing any technical issues, you can press the button Help located at the top right of your screen. And there you'll find the most frequently asked questions and how to deal with them. Fingers crossed, though, you're not going to have any technical problems and you're going to be able to sit back, relax and enjoy your hour with us. So let's get started. Now, as you're all very aware, you don't need me to tell you, the past 2 years has had a revolutionary influence on the way that we all work. Now, we've moved from pretty much going into the office 5 days a week to being in a situation where we needed to work completely remotely and are now moving, fingers crossed, post-pandemic into a hybrid way of working. GoodHabitz, with the help of the research company Market Effect, have conducted a big study over 13,000 employees in both the UK and in Europe to better understand the effect of remote working, in particular on the relationship between employees and also managers. So during this event, we're going to be looking and sharing some of these pretty eye-opening results with you. And after our discussion, the former HR director of the BBC and the current CEO of Disruptive HR, Lucy Adams, is joining us to talk about how to work as a leader in a hybrid world. We would love your questions for Lucy. Do get thinking about them now, send them in, and we will make sure we get them to Lucy a little later on. So without further ado, I should say, let's get on with the show. And I am not going to discuss the results alone of this research. I have got the fantastic company of Alice New. She is the customer success coach at GoodHabitz. You can see Alice, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. An exciting time for Alice because she's also, as you can see, or maybe you can't see because she's wearing a really appropriate black dress, but she's hiding her big bump. You're having a baby as well. So we're introducing a baby to GoodHabitz as well.
The newest team member.
Yes, exactly. You've already got her prepped and primed probably. So congratulations on that front. Lovely to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we start, a lot of everyone in the audience will know who you are, a lot won't know what you do. So what exactly do you do at GoodHabitz?
Yeah, thank you, Emma. So I am the GoodHabitz UK Customer Success Manager. So I've worked for GoodHabitz for about 3.5 years now. For those that don't know what that role entails, it's basically my job to work with people when they decide they want to come on board with us. I work with them from the very beginning to ensure they have a smooth implementation process, but also then I work with them throughout the duration. So I really help to understand what their goals are, what their ambitions are, and really help them to achieve success using our product and getting the most value out of our product.
Right, excellent. Now, you have conducted a big piece of research as we find ourselves in a really interesting time, don't we? Fingers crossed post-pandemic, but going into a new way of working for pretty much everyone around the world. Tell us a bit more about this research and who you spoke to and where they were.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it was a big piece of research and we really wanted to get a wide perspective. So we asked over 1,000 people in the UK and over 12,500 employees. You can see just the stats we've got here across Europe. Because we wanted to get such a wide variety, we asked lots of people from different roles, from different organisations, different industries and different company sizes as well. But what was really interesting about this is that we realised the work situation had changed in the UK for 46% of people. So that shift from office to hybrid or remote.
46%. I mean, you're talking about millions and millions of people, aren't you? It's an enormous number, and it makes you realise just what a great job companies did, pivoting on that spot and changing their workforces so quickly. What was the standout comment or standout numbers for you looking at this research?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, something that was a real standout was 71% of the respondents said that they felt adequately supported by their managers whilst working remotely. I mean, this is great.
Yeah.
This shows really how well and how quickly we adapted in this pandemic, and is probably one of the reasons why lots of companies are now looking at this state of working moving forwards, and in a permanent fixture. But what we want to look at is the challenges that that people now face, and how we can really maintain this. It's great that we've had this experience, but how do we keep it going?
So there's momentum.
Yeah.
We're all looking to the future now, aren't we?
Yeah.
What are employees feeling then right now about their confidence in their managers to lead them forward into this new hybrid way of working, which is we're still getting a head round, aren't we?
Absolutely. I mean, again, interesting results. We saw 1 in 4 said that they were worried that their manager lacks the right skills to lead their teams to the future. So not catastrophic.
No, but still a sizable number of people you're talking about here, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. What it does is it just shows that, this is something we're still adapting to. And this is probably why this has come out. But it just makes us aware that there needs to be a real focus on upskilling managers, on managers understanding where they can upskill themselves and where they can, get the information to learn how to lead in this new environment.
Yeah. It's not easy being a modern day manager, is it? Because, gone are the days where, you would have your team in front of you in the office, you'd be handing out administrative tasks, you'd be kind of like helicopter managing, watching what everyone's doing. Now there are so many soft skills, aren't there, involved? What do people want in terms of, what do employees want when they're looking for managers in terms of leading them in the future?
Well, we got actually 5 top answers here,
Yeah, let's have a look.
which really weren't that much of a surprise, but communication, team spirit, empathy, inspirational leadership, and focus on mental health at work. So this is actually really exciting for us because, of course, you can see lots of soft skills there, and it really does show now the depth that people are expecting from that relationship and support from their manager. But of course, this is easier to pick up on in the office, for example. You can walk in, you can glance up, you can see how your team are doing, you can feel that energy. You can't do that so easily at home. You can't do that. If you're on a virtual call, you can fake being okay for an hour and then the screen comes down. It's much harder for a manager to understand how their team are doing and what their needs are in that virtual environment.
And interesting that so many are soft skills at the very top. I mean, for me as an outsider, how do you teach empathy, empathetic leadership? That can't be an easy thing to teach, can it?
Yeah, I mean,
have it or you don't.
No, I mean there are so many ways, but I mean I think one of the biggest things that have come out of this pandemic is the need for communication. So whilst before, we've always taught that communication is key, now it really is. If you really want to understand how your team are doing, you need to have those conversations with them. You need to ask those questions, but really care about the answers, really listen to the answers. If you're able to have those conversations with your team and pick up on those needs, then you can move forwards with that. But it is about being really aware and a conscious effort really for managers to really shift in this way.
And mental health awareness very much up there as well, as you would imagine.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So we've talked so far, haven't we, Alice, about leaders and managers and what is expected of them. What about employees and what they want? The people who are still on the way up and what they're still striving to achieve. Where are they right now in terms of the research that you conducted?
Okay, this didn't surprise me at all, but it's a fantastic figure. So 70% of the UK employees said they would be happier in their role if they had opportunities to develop themselves. Now, the skills that we were looking at in particular, digital skills, productivity, leadership, I mean, age-old, people always want to develop in those areas. But what we see time and time again with our clients is that their exit reasons, or when people leave the company, the exit reasons given are for lack of development opportunities and lack of support and encouragement with the manager. What's frustrating about this is so many companies do have access to this and do have these resources for people to be able to develop themselves. So it's really about finding ways to make their managers aware and really help to support them in this, because it's available. It's just how do we tap into it?
Yeah, and keep you happy employees. You're going to stop the so-called great resignation, which we're hearing about a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually a really great figure as well, because it really shows clearly and plainly that there is an appetite for people to learn. There is so much here that, organisations, a lot that I'm working with already, have taken notice of this and they really are working on it. But for those that aren't, it's plain and simple. People are asking for this. We need to give it to them.
And I suppose leadership training is interesting because it's with that, with people having an eye on the future for where they might be in 5 or 10 or 15 years' time.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great opportunity for us to not only build a strong workforce of managers, but to also future-proof organisations.
Yeah.
This is our next generation of leaders that we're inspiring. So it's really important.
So I know you're out and about, you're talking to clients every day. What is the mood of your clients right now? What are they focusing on? What are you helping them with?
A lot of my clients are focusing on upskilling their managers. A lot of them have actually only started going back into the offices now, so this is something quite new for them. So they really are providing managers with leadership programs. I'm working with them to understand how they can use our courses to supplement those programs. For some that don't have the luxury of actually creating a leadership program or to provide that training, we're working on purely online bundles using some of the courses that we have to really get that upskilling in the right areas they need to focus on. Also, I'm running sessions with managers. So we run an inspiration session, which helps.
That? I'd like to join one of those.
Yeah, it's really good fun, actually. It's very interactive. We talk about not only the need and the benefits of e-learning, but also what the managers themselves want to upskill themselves in, what the team development areas are that they've noticed, how they can use our resources and our courses to really help them feel comfortable and confident in going and having those conversations and leading that development for their teams as well. Because it's scary. Not all managers have always managed like this. This is something that's very new for some people. So being able to inspire them and let them understand that this is important, but they can do it actually quite easily by having an invested conversation, by checking in with their teams. It can be small incremental changes that lead to a really huge impact.
And I suppose as the world hopefully is recovering post-pandemic, there's no better time to be doing this when it comes to hybrid leadership.
Absolutely. I mean, the time is now that we've got the results here. We all need to be working on it.
It's a pleasure to chat to you. You're going to stay with us, aren't you?
I am.
Come and help me out with talking to Lucy in a few minutes' time. But Alice, for now, thank you very much. So we have gathered that employees are largely feeling very positive about continuing to work in a hybrid fashion, but they expect their managers to have the right people skills to lead. And also, as Alice was telling us, they really want to invest in their own skill set to develop themselves in their jobs going forward. So what does all that mean for HR managers? Many of you who are watching are HR managers, and we want to give you some top tips now. Some of you working with large workforces to look after. Our keynote speaker is one of Europe's best-known HR executives. She's got some great insights and ideas for you this afternoon. Lucy Adams is the CEO of Disruptive HR. She's also the former HR director at BBC, where she led HR and internal communications there. Since leaving the BBC, Lucy has been working with major organisations to help them rethink their approach to leading change, also employee engagement, HR and internal communications. Lucy very much puts the human back into human resources, and we are delighted to have her here today. Now, Lucy's going to talk for about 30 minutes or so, and then we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. Please do ask your questions and use that question tab that I talked about at the beginning of our time together. So it is over to you, Lucy.
Hi everybody, it's lovely to be here. Thanks so much, Emma and Alice, for those fascinating insights. And as Emma said at the very start of the programme, 2 years ago, many of us had no choice at all. We had to work from home. And now that we've got a degree of choice back, it's fascinating to see how organisations are responding to this, how leaders are choosing to respond to that choice. So what I want to share with you is just what are leaders, organisations doing in terms of making that choice about, how and where they work and how they manage their people, but also to give you some really practical tips about the kinds of things that they're doing to make sure that they keep the innovation going, that they don't lose their culture, that they retain good people, that they do address issues around potential isolation or lack of communication, all of the kind of challenges that we know, because we've all experienced it, that a hybrid world can bring. So I want to kick off with just looking at kind of, what are companies doing? Now, most companies are offering a degree of flexibility, all right? So you've kind of got those who are saying, everybody back in the office, but most organisations are doing something to the right of this spectrum. They are starting to say, you know what, actually, we're going to allow you to come back into the office for 3 days, but we want you to kind of still work at home for 2, or vice versa. Some are offering personal choice, and some have kind of gone to the other extreme, got rid of their offices, or have said, you know what, there is going to be no individual working done. It's only going to be collaboration zone. So let me just give you an example of each one of those. So you probably saw in the press, Goldman Sachs chief executive famously saying, working from home is an aberration. And they've come out again and said, no more working from home. I think this is a huge mistake. I think that ultimately many of us enjoyed the benefits of a hybrid world. And whilst I'm not saying that we don't want to have some face-to-face interaction, many of us don't want to go back to the way that things were. I get why he said it. Some of the things that he said in connection with it, the aberration point got the headline. But what he was also talking about, the fact was that they had an apprenticeship culture, that they had a lot of young people who were perhaps missing out because they weren't observing people at work, and that was preventing them from learning and growing. So I do get where he was coming from, but I think it's a mistake, and I think they'll end up losing talent. So anybody who is kind of saying you must be back in the office, I think is a mistake. We've then got the kind of next two, which is where the bulk of people are. I'm not going to dwell on the final one too much, but this kind of 2 to 3 days a week is where the vast majority of large organisations like Expedia, that's where they sit. Now, again, I personally think this is a huge mistake. This is old-fashioned thinking. This is the kind of, you can work there from this amount of time, but you must come in for these 3 days. Why a number of days? It doesn't make any sense. What it does do is it gives the organisation, and HR very often is the kind of the monitor, the arbiter of that, it gives us a clear policy that we can explain, it makes it easy to communicate. But in terms of actually meeting the needs of people for a hybrid world, I'm not sure it does that. We're still constraining people, we're still treating them like children, we're still saying you must come in on these days and not on those days. For some people, actually, they want to work 5 days in the office or 5 days at home. And I think ultimately it's about team choice, individual choice, having discussions with your boss, which is the way that Cisco is doing it, which is the next example. So it's all about personal choice for Cisco. It is, I'm going to have a conversation with my manager and we'll work it through. It's grown-up conversations rather than relying on poor HR to kind of come along with our policies and everything mandated from the centre. Now, as I said, I'm not going to dwell too much on the Dropbox remote working only example, apart from saying the thought of going into a Dropbox studio, if I was a Dropbox employee, and being told I couldn't work on my emails because I had to be collaborating would probably aggravate me slightly. So most organisations doing something in the middle. They're not saying everybody back, they're not saying everybody work from home, but there is a difference between how they handle it. And I think the more that we can look at this personal choice, seeing our employees as consumers with individual needs, wants, preferences, and talking it through within our teams to try and accommodate as best we can, those are the more progressive organisations who are really reaping the benefits of hybrid working. So how are they actually leading it, though? What are leaders doing, and how can we in HR help them to manage this better? So one organisation I want to call out, Telefonica. Now, they have a brilliant line, which is work when and where you are most productive. And they say that they're going to manage on the basis of results. It's outcome-based, which I think, again, is super smart. So they take an approach which is what they call tight, loose, tight to managing. And I'm just going to explain what I mean by that, because it might be something that you could share with your managers. Tight, loose, tight means being really clear on the outcomes that you want. Now, sometimes we see managers saying, I want them in the office because then I can see what they're doing and I know that they're working. This is a really old-fashioned mentality, isn't it? And it's quite sad, really, that we're still thinking that. Whereas at Telefonica, like they do at many other organisations, it's all about, what do I expect? What do I need? What are the outcomes that I want? And then loosening up a little bit, all right, in terms of the how it gets done. That's where the innovation comes from. That's where the autonomy comes from. That's where our sense of empowerment comes from. That loosening up, not that task supervision. But then it's not a hippie commune, right? It's not anarchy. It's also about being really tight on accountability. But getting our leaders and managers to think about setting clear outcomes and then clearly making people accountable for those outcomes doesn't really matter where they do it from or indeed when they do it, as long as those two are met. So that tight, loose, tight, I think, is a really effective way of leading, particularly in a hybrid world when you can't see everybody all of the time. You can't oversee the tasks. One of the things that is so vitally important for hybrid working is this issue of trust. And there's a couple of examples I wanted to call out. If we have a starting point that is, if I can't see my team, I don't trust them to be working very hard, that's a real worry, isn't it? If we apply this kind of critical parenting where we try and design our rules and our policies around the badly behaving employees, but we apply it to everybody, that creates a really stifling, probably compliant, but very passive organization. If we want to thrive in this disrupted world, then we need to lead with trust. We need a starting point of, I trust you to do the right thing, to behave decently to yourself, your team, your customers, but I also trust you to use your judgment. Now, during the pandemic, we saw many organizations having to trust. And of course, we've all seen the famous stats around productivity going up. These organizations, I think, have handled it very well. So Swiss Re, they have an approach which is called Own the Way You Work. Now, what they mean by that is when you're most productive, when you've got caring responsibilities or what your passions and hobbies are. Are you a morning person, an evening person? When do you work best? You own that. But equally, being a grown-up is about ensuring that it works for your customer, that it works for your manager, for your colleagues. So we expect you to seek out conversations. They start from trust, own the way you work, but ultimately they deal with it through conversations to make sure it works for everybody. And PwC, sometimes when managers will say, I'll let them work from home when they've been with me a while. That trust has to be earned. And I love what PwC said. They said, we've trusted them enough to lure them away from another organization. We trust them enough to pay them. We trust them enough to let them loose in front of our customers, to use company property, to take all that risk that involves of taking on somebody new. Trust doesn't have to be earned. They can work from home from the outset. So trust really doesn't have to be earned. Now, one of the questions that often comes up around hybrid working, and the chief exec of Goldman Sachs kind of alluded to it, is what about our culture? Won't we lose our culture if people are working from home and they don't see each other? Now, there's lots of research around this, and Alice and the team have done a fantastic job at looking at some of this. What I would say is that I think the organizations that get their head around this and are doing something great about it are the ones that say, it's not going to be 2 days in or 3 days in and 2 days out. We're not going to prescribe by time, but we're going to identify as a team the moments that matter to us as a team and those moments that need to be done together. Now, several organizations that I work with have done this, and it's things like when we've got difficult news to give, that's not something you want to do over a Zoom call. If someone's struggling or it's someone's first day, what are the moments that matter that define you, your organization, your team culture, and which of those need to absolutely be done face to face? That's a really healthy discussion and a way of kind of managing it, hybrid working for the best. Collaboration we worry about. We think, oh my God, we're not going to be able to build innovation. We're not going to be connected with one another. Now, all the research tells us that actually communication and connectivity between people within a team that already knew each other has actually gone up during the pandemic. It's so easy, isn't it, to jump on a Zoom or a Teams call and connect. So that level of communication has gone up dramatically. What has gone down is the communication across teams, across departments. We don't get that bumping into each other in the coffee shop anymore, or seeing that person in the lift, or passing by their desk. So VaynerMedia did something that I think is a really smart, simple idea. They did this thing called 12 at 12. The HR director invited 12 random people from across the organisation to get together on a Zoom call at 12 o'clock for half an hour. There was no work agenda, there were no tasks to give out, it was purely to get to know each other. So they did things like, who would play you in a film? Or, show your animal, your pet on camera, that kind of thing. It was not meant to be a serious thing, it was meant to be a time when they could form connections. All of that is about the culture. That is about retention of culture, and you can do it. Of course, it's not easy to do it in a hybrid world, but it can be done. And I love what GitLabs did around innovation. They said, you know what, innovation isn't about the brainstorming. God, we've all been to those horrendous conferences, haven't we, where we've had to go into a seminar room and write on a flip chart, and we pretend that that's innovation. Actually, innovation is iteration, working up ideas, sharing, building, critiquing. It's a discipline. The brainstorming bit that we tend to refer to when we think about innovation, yeah, of course, that is really hard to do on Teams or Zooms, because we can't speak at the same time and build. It has to be done sequentially, and it's painful and it's dry at times. But what GitLab found was that actually innovation went up through using what they call asynchronous tools, communication tools like Google Docs, Slack, even WhatsApp. And what they found was that if you're presenting your idea in a formal face-to-face boardroom meeting style, then actually you kind of feel the pressure for it to be perfect. Whereas building on each other's ideas on these asynchronous communication tools like Google Docs, like Slack, like WhatsApp, actually people didn't feel that same pressure. They were more able to put across ideas that might work, and not be frightened of them getting knocked down or changed slightly. Innovation can happen, all of it can happen. We just need to be clear about the activity that we're trying to achieve and what's the best way of doing it. So, I'm going to kind of just touch on one of the more negative aspects of hybrid working, which is proximity bias. And proximity bias is a thing, okay? It is an actual thing. We know that if you see somebody regularly, you are more likely to prefer them for promotion, that you are more likely to communicate with them, involve them in decisions, and to think more highly of them. And the sad thing is, people who have been in head offices for years have kind of known this for a long time, right? The people in the head office do tend to kind of get treated slightly better than the ones who are out in the field. So this is not a new phenomenon. But there is a slight worry, I think, that the ones who choose to go back to the office, and if the leader is always in the office, then that might actually lead to a degree of favoritism and this proximity bias. These three organisations are kind of tackling that proximity bias issue in different ways. So we've got Let's Go. They focus on the outcomes, and they put those in their job ads. They don't focus on all the things that have to be done. It's what has to be achieved. And then they leave it up to people to make their own decisions about how they could deliver that. They found that that means that they're not being prescriptive about where the work gets done. I'll go to EY at the bottom there. So EY, what they do is they challenge each other. So let's say you've got two managers going in, interviewing somebody, and the hiring manager is going to prefer the candidate that actually is in the office more. What they'll do is they do this PTR challenge. So they'll say, is that just because you prefer this person, you just kind of like them better? Or is it just traditionally that this job's always been done from the office? Or is it a genuine requirement that they are in the office? Now, it's not going to solve the world, but it's just that kind of peer-to-peer challenge that can be really powerful. And Coinbase, what they do is that they're looking at the way that they manage their meetings. So if they say, if we are doing a virtual meeting and we've got people in the office and we've got people at home, everybody joins from their laptop. really powerful way of just saying, actually, we've got to create an equal playing field. So I'm going to finish up with this, which is something that I'm hoping we can get the slides to you. I'm kind of going to look at Emma, thank you very much. And what this is just a checklist that you can share with your managers. I'm not going to read it out to you. You can read it for yourselves, but it's just maybe something that they could think about. The one I'm going to call out is the first one. Do I, as a leader, work remotely? Because you know what? It doesn't matter what our policies say. If the leader is in the office 5 days a week, then gradually everyone will gravitate back to that, because we'll know that that's where the work gets done, that's where the big decisions get made. So one of the biggest things that leaders can do, is like they do at PepsiCo, is leave loudly, is actually say, you know what, I'm going to work from home tomorrow, I'm not in the office, let people know, because that will set a tone. Thanks so much for listening. There's the key takeaways for you. Again, I'm not going to read those out to you. You can read those for yourselves. It's been great talking to you, and I'm going to see you very shortly for some questions.
Lucy, thank you very much. You are back with us, back on the comfortable sofa. I don't know if you've had the pleasure of meeting Alice before. We did in the makeup room, didn't we?
Yeah, we were talking earlier about the pleasures of daughters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's the secret's out. Having a baby girl, but there you go. Do you know, we've all been so good. We are ahead of time, all of us. Our conversation and then in your fantastic presentation, which means we've got loads of time for questions. But the even better news is we've got lots and lots of questions coming in.
Oh, brilliant.
So I've written some great notes, or not great, but notes anyway, and our audience have got some fantastic questions. So let's start with this. And I love what you talked about trust in particular, and starting from a position of trust. Being the devil's advocate here, being the cynical old journalist amongst you all, what about if you don't trust your employees? I mean, I'm sure in an ideal world, everyone does, but you both must meet leaders and managers who think, well, no, there is an issue here. What do they do about it? And Lucy, I'll start with you first, and Alice, jump in if you like.
Yeah, please do. And, you know, and I think that, you know, Disruptive HR, we talk a lot about this adult-to-adult piece. And you usually find that if an individual can't be trusted post-pandemic to work from home, chances are they couldn't be trusted pre-pandemic. You know, it's not suddenly that overnight they become an untrustworthy employee. The trouble is that we've avoided those conversations. So what then, it becomes then an issue about the policy, and we need to have a standard policy, because actually I as a leader don't want to have that uncomfortable conversation. So if, you know, for HR people who are watching this, I would say that you're urging them not to go for this blanket one-size-fits-all, everybody's got to be in the office, or 3 or 4 days in the office. Don't go with that, because they actually want to get to that bad egg. Have the conversation with the individual.
With the bad egg.
Have the conversation with the bad egg, you know, or the bad apple, or whatever we want to express, whatever piece of fruit and food we want to think about. That's the key thing, is not to apply a blanket policy because we want to get to 1 or 2 individuals.
Would you agree, Alice?
Yeah, absolutely. And it actually, if I can just skip on to something else, which is something that has come up a lot recently with clients, which is actually about we talk about a lot about managers wanting to develop their teams. What about the managers that actually don't want to develop their teams because maybe they see that as a threat? Wow, that's something that we are actually having conversations around, and it makes me wonder how much easier it's going to be for those managers to hide now with this hybrid working.
Yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, I mean, I've got a background in HR, right? So, you know, everything I criticise, I have done. There's no higher moral ground here. But, you know, we've built an industry in HR with processes to compensate for poor managers. You know, we don't trust them to have a conversation to manage performance, so we'll put in a performance appraisal system, which doesn't actually drive performance or motivation at all. We don't trust them to manage their careers, so we'll do a talent management review. And so we've kind of put these big, bulky processes in, as opposed to, and you mentioned it earlier, there are small, simple things that they can do. I don't know, LinkedIn stay conversations, which is undocumented. It's 15 minutes, which just says, why did you choose LinkedIn? Are we doing anything that your previous company did that used to annoy you, which is why you left? And my favourite, if you were managing you, how would it be different? It's just providing them with tools. You talked about it, giving them little questions, or the kind of famous stuff that we're all hearing about now is nudges, you know, give them little nudges. It doesn't have to be a big formal training program. It can actually be tools, little videos, little resources that just might encourage them to see that it's not a big thing. It's just asking the right questions at the right time.
Yeah. I'm keen to get some of the questions from our fantastic audience who are tuning in. I'm going to break the magic, if you don't mind. I'm just going to tell our lovely technical team who are behind the scenes, who you guys can't see, and you certainly can't see at home, that there's a bit of a block on the screen that I'm looking. There we go. Now I can actually see, rather than making up the questions, how I can see them. There you go. So, first question, what about the customer's voice in all of this? Great question. What do you say to that, Lucy?
Yeah, and I think that there is an assumption that people who are working from home aren't going to be as productive, aren't going to be as pro-customer, aren't going to be as passionate about their jobs. Of course, this has got to work for the customer as well. And I think, you know, any manager is trying to work out the balance between, you know, the organisational needs, the customer needs, the individual needs, their own needs. Of course, this isn't easy, but it's through conversation rather than a policy that you get. And I think, again, going back to trust, we need to trust that our employees, if they have a customer-serving role, by and large, not everyone, but by and large will want to do a job for that customer. I was really taken with Dropbox, actually. They did some work where they asked their people, they were giving them all these perks and all of these benefits. And they said, you know, do these perks and benefits work? And they said, they're okay, but actually what we'd really like is the tools to enable us to do our job properly. And I think, you know, we kind of assume that actually, and I really dislike this view of working from home, that it's an indulgence.
Yeah.
Actually, it's blooming hard working from home if you've got kids and you've got Amazon deliveries and, you know, you've got all that stuff going on.
Put a wash on.
Yeah,
still.
exactly.
Work,
you know,
not
but
fun.
most people have proved themselves to be trustworthy and productive and will put the customer's needs sometimes above their own.
You're nodding in agreement. Would you like to chip in?
Yeah, I actually have a background in customer service. And
Yes, that's how you began.
Yeah,
In a call centre, how you began. That's how you got into the industry, right? Is it?
Yeah.
Working in a call centre, which must be fantastic training, I have to say.
Yeah, especially because the company I worked for was award-winning in customer service. It was something that was really important to them. So actually, I think it's a personality thing. If somebody has the want and desire to do well for the customer and actually cares about the customer, it doesn't matter whether they're working at home or whether they're working in the office. I guess the things that we need to look at, though, are how we keep people motivated, because if they are missing those certain things that they enjoyed about being in the office all the time, the interaction with their pals, you know, that informal interaction with the manager, it's thinking how we keep that person, you know, to be a top performer, to be somebody that cares about it. So that customer shouldn't ever suffer, but it's really the manager's job to make sure that their employees are really just still feeling good and motivated about their role, and that's how we keep the top performers.
And I think that's where a blend comes in. I think, you know, I'm not saying that working from home all the time is ideal. It can be, you're draining, you know, if you're just doing Zoom call after Zoom call. You
don't put boundaries in, definitely.
You don't, you know, you kind of think, well, particularly during lockdown, it was like, well, I haven't got anything else to do, so I might as well work, you know.
Back-to-back meetings all day, every
exactly.
day. Yeah,
in fact,
crazy.
Discovery, I was chatting to them and they were saying that they've changed the default setting. You know, you kind of, a default calendar setting for a meeting is like half an hour or an hour to 25 minutes and 45 minutes because, again, that kind of, you know, technological nudge just to allow people that break that we would have had walking to the meeting, you know, or going to grab a cup of coffee.
The downtime.
Great idea.
Yeah, it is. It's useful.
OK, let's go on to another question now, another great one. How do you nurture new leaders or would-be leaders in a hybrid environment? And leadership came up massively as, or leadership for future, skills to become a future leader in empowering employees. So how do they do it?
So I think, again, start really simple. So I like the approach that SAP take, which is where they say, as a leader, we want you to do 3 things. We want you to coach your team to be better at what they do. We want you to show appreciation and lead with trust. And I think, just do that. Those three things. Don't worry about all the systems, the processes, and then they measure it. They measure this on a regular basis. And if you're not, if your people aren't saying that I'm coached to do a better job, that I'm given the autonomy to do my best work and I feel appreciated, you don't get to manage people anymore, because it's too important. So I think starting with emerging leaders is great because they are intellectually hungry, they're curious, they're open. I think Standard Chartered have just said that they actually diverting a lot of the investment that used to be in senior leadership, because it was always about get the senior leaders on board. Actually, let's go with the junior emerging leaders because they are open. Whereas sometimes speaking as an old person, it's like you don't want to change so much. I think that's great. I think it is tricky in a hybrid world, but it's also tricky in a non-hybrid world. Being a leader today is a really tough gig. It's just really tough.
Again, I'm going to break the magic one more time, just to say we're getting a little bit of. That's it. I think it's your blouse and just moving a little bit. There you go. Just on the microphone. I think there's a little bit of interference.
I'll try not to move about too much.
No, but it's great because you're so passionate. We don't want you to sit there and not move.
I'm a hand waver. I know. I'm a hand waver.
No.
I'll try and be
it's
more
usually
still.
my hair that gets in. But and you've done well. Your hair's not touched at all. But anyway, so hopefully the sound issues are resolved now. I think there was a little bit of crackling, but it's all good now. So and most people can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, great.
I want to ask another question, then bring you in, Alice. That's right, because I know you've got a lot to talk about, especially when it comes to leadership skills. But this is a good question. One of our lovely people who are joining today have said no mention of the cost to the employer keeping the office open for employees if and when they come in. And that, it's an incredibly expensive thing, isn't it, when you've got this huge spanking new edge quarters and no one's in there.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we're being a bit disingenuous, actually.
Yeah.
There was one company, I can't remember who it is now, but they actually said, look, we've got this enormous expense. Most of these offices on a really long lease, so they're not getting out of them anytime soon anyway. So they've said, actually, we've got this space, but how should we use it?
Yeah.
So they involved people, but they were really upfront about it. I think there is a kind of sense that we do need these offices, absolutely, but we don't necessarily need them to be designed in the way that they were. So we're seeing LinkedIn, Mondelez moving from 75% individual working space to 20 to 75 collaboration zones, and they're really those who can afford it are being really creative around the different types of work and activity that you need, or using WeWork spaces or using hotels. And there's lots of kind of other options now to enable people to still come together, but not necessarily doing that hours commute.
So using the space differently and more creatively, maybe for some fantastic courses, leadership training courses.
Yeah, absolutely. If people do want to come in and get involved in the office, which actually a lot of people are expressing an interest in doing. So we're now seeing a real shift from people just doing lots of online training, which of course they had to do, to now really wanting to get that face-to-face training in. But there is still the need for online as well. Yeah. So to have that blend, and it's exactly the same, isn't it? Some people working at home, some people working in the office. Actually, training works in the same way. It's great to all get together. But what about preparing people first for the training that they're doing, giving them some courses that they can do to prepare themselves for that topic, some extra reading afterwards? That's the kind of thing that we're really seeing people take advantage of now. Yeah. Because there was a time when actually online learning wasn't a thing. It was for the traditional mandatory health and safety courses. That we've all done them, we've all been there. Whereas now...
How to not take a bribe. That
absolutely. Yeah. Whereas now it's really something that people are looking for, that they like that blend of it. And it's really important because then people can do aspects of this training in their own time. And just jumping on what you were talking about earlier about the how we nurture the new managers. Well, this is where soft skills are so important because that's actually what people are looking for now. Gone are the days where managing is just about, you were saying earlier, it's not about just, making sure people are in on time anymore or the administrative tasks. People want so much more from a manager. They want a friend, a mentor, somebody to encourage them. So actually really helping those emerging managers understand the need for soft skills and those practical tips on how to have those conversations. That's what's really important now. So people should be having.
It's all in the conversation.
Yeah,
it's just, and yet I think we've sort of given them process, haven't we, and policies and training programs that teach them how to do the process and the policy, rather than sometimes it's just having those basic conversations and practicing them.
Yeah.
And you know, what happens if they cry, or what happens if they shout, or what happens if they walk out? How are you going to handle it? And you know, and it's just that real kind of basic human stuff, you know.
And work together. Use that transparency. Why does it have to be a secret what managers are learning about?
Yeah.
You know, all learn together. You know, ask people what they want from their managers. Get managers to talk to their employees and find out exactly what they want to learn, and maybe role play together. You know, just if people are really missing that kind of interaction, these are the kinds of things that you can do in a virtual environment still. So, you know, if you have your virtual meetings, you can practice all of these sorts of things. And it's sometimes easier to do that virtually because you don't feel so on the spot in a role play environment virtually. So you can actually have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that. You can almost be a bit bolder with your boss, probably.
Yeah.
When there's a screen in the way.
Oh, absolutely. Some of the things that
Well, they
come
do
up in
say,
sessions.
don't they, that that's one of the reasons why leaders want to be back in the office, is because there's no hierarchy. You know, you can all do the chat button, you can all do the raise the hand, you know, and you've all got the same amount of space on the screen.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Lisa, you talked a lot in your presentation about, you know, some people having 5 days back at work, 2 days, 3 days. A question on that now. Oh, actually, there was a question, but it's just that someone's just moved on. I'll tell you what, we'll go back to that question because I think my lovely guy who's doing my auto cue has. There we go. It says, I see sense in a policy stating 2 days a week in the office. Our firm take an approach of 40% of your time in the office or similar. Any thoughts on that? No specific days, flexibility, but with guidance. Does that sound like on the mark, or does it depend on who the company is?
I think anything which is around guidance around, I think you need to be in for this amount of time and out for that amount of time, I think misses the point.
Right.
It's old-fashioned thinking. Apologies.
What should they be doing?
So what they should be doing.
provide?
So one of my favourite examples is a company called Arkiva, and they've got a real mix. You know, they've got
What do they
frontline
do?
workers. So it's utilities,
Right,
engineering, and what they did was to say, give some guidance, but to say these are the conversations we want you to have in your team, and each team have their own charter. So some teams were saying, actually, this is the nature of our work, this is our personal circumstances, these are our personal preferences, and actually we want to be in all the time. Yeah. Great, that's agreed as a team. For others, it was, this is the nature of our work, this is our personal preferences, and actually they wanted to be at home most of the time. Others were saying, actually, it means that we should come together on these points. It needs to be more personalised.
Does it need to be led
tailored.
from the employees more?
More from the employees, in conversation, meeting the needs of customers and managers.
Conversation.
Conversations.
It's all about
again.
conversation.
And what these teams found is that the engagement scores, they've just done their engagement survey, the engagement scores for the top 10 to 20 teams, they'd all done their charter. The bottom scoring teams had not done it. They hadn't had these conversations. So that's a really empowering, but what it's not saying is we're going to mandate from the centre what you must be doing, because all of our teams are so different. The nature of the work we do is different. Yeah. The nature of our personal circumstances or preferences are different. So the more that the manager can own that on a local level, and sometimes that means saying, no, you can't. You know, it's not about everybody getting what they want. Yeah. It's about the conversation.
OK, let's move on. I want to get through as many as we can. This person asks, how can you support personal development in a hybrid working environment? A great question, isn't it? How can you support personal development if you can't see?
Yeah,
your
I think it's
employees?
easier than we kind of. I think, you know, Alice alluded to the fact that actually the opening up of development opportunities that would previously have been much more expensive, much less available to us, much more time consuming, would involve travel, would involve taking time away from work. Actually, in a hybrid world, I think we've become very adept at taking bite-sized little chunks of learning, which, let's face it, most of us won't watch something if it's more than 4 minutes, right?
How would you do it? What would be the first steps that you would take to instill that?
So first of all, employee-owned. Absolutely employee-owned. You know, the amount of employees that will say, oh, you know, my man, no one's had a career conversation or a development conversation. It's like, hold on, are you 12? You know, you're a grown-up. What do you want to do?
Right.
And then I think this is where the manager comes in and helping them to make that it doesn't have to be big formal training. There's a whole range of options that they could go for, including go and buy a book on Amazon, go and have a cup of coffee with someone, do a Zoom call with someone. And so I love Viacom. They have something called pop-up mentoring. Anyone, anywhere in the organisation can ask anyone else for a 30-minute conversation if it helps their development. Now, they introduced that because of the pandemic. They were going to have this big, cumbersome mentoring scheme. They dropped that. It
must take forever to instill.
Exactly, and they've gone for something that's much more fluid, agile, much more attuned to the kind of world that we're in now. So I think the options for development have actually increased.
Absolutely.
The availability of online, digital, I think is fantastic.
I'm sure, Alice, you're brimming with ideas. Give us a few.
Just some of the things that our clients are doing to really help in that development and to help managers to enable people to develop when they're not working, in the office. It's, again, have those conversations, but it's allowing people to understand when they can learn, how they can learn. So do the managers understand the resources available to them? Yeah. If not, why not? This is something that we need to be working with the managers, but also just letting people know what is available to them, helping them to understand why that's relevant. So is it something that they are wanting to develop because it's something to do with work and progression? Is there something that they're just interested in learning about? What are the boundaries? Can they learn at work? Do you expect them to learn in their lunch breaks? But it's about making it transparent.
Yeah.
So, really understanding what they can get from it, what they can gain from it, and making it clear when that's available to them and how.
We have time for one final question. We've got so many more. I have to try and get them to you, so try and get an answer for our audiences. Anyway, but this is for both of you. You talk a lot about communication, conversations, communications. That's been the kind of big takeaway, I think, hasn't it? And it being very important. Quite often when I'm in a virtual meeting, people will say very little. They are on mute and they don't come off. How can you get people to be more interactive in a virtual environment?
Yeah, it's really hard. I do loads of online delivery. And we were talking earlier about when you see a blank, no one has got their camera on. It's really hard. I think establishing some ground rules as a team can be useful, like do we have cameras on or cameras off?
Because when they're off, it is strange.
It's really weird. I mean, I've got a newfound respect for DJs who just talk into oblivion, because you've got no feedback. I think we can be better with the chat because I think it's harder to put your hand up and speak into an online meeting where you don't know what other people are doing, you can't read the room. But what we do is we ask them to use the chat function first, use polling. There's loads of technological support that you can get. Use breakout rooms. Yeah. There are all sorts, the Teams and Zoom and all of this technology is just adapted so quickly to when we first started doing this, and it was a bit painful. You'd say, anybody got any views? And there'd just be this deathly silence and tumbleweed. Whereas now, actually, getting them to put things in, asking them, not have you got any questions, but who's doing this stuff already? So being smarter around the kind of questions
more direct.
you ask. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would you say?
I mean, when I'm doing sessions, I always speak to my clients first and say, who can I call on? If I've got a quiet group, are there any names of people who are coming who will not mind me calling them out? Or, can you get involved and can you maybe shift the conversation along? Now, with my team personally, it's easier because we're a smaller team. So I already know that I can call people out if they're being quiet. I can say, Martin, come on, what's your view on this? Yeah. And that's easier. But if it's all about really knowing your team and knowing your audience. And if you are really delivering to a group of strangers, which I guess managers, this is for managers and they wouldn't be, but if you have got a brand new room of people and you don't know how to gauge that, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's asking questions that don't feel too personal, so that people don't have that block to feel uncomfortable answering.
No yes or no's, which is what I have to do with my children. To get anything out of them. Never ask a leading question. Yeah.
Okay, I'm taking notes here.
Oh, that's another programme.
Okay. We'll do that next time.
Yeah. And then that's a new career for you, parenting and coaching. Huh? Yeah, I've got a few of those up my sleeve. Anyway, Alice, it's been a pleasure to meet you and talk to you. And Lisa, it's been a pleasure as well. Thank you for your
really
time.
Enjoyed
it's been
it.
really, really great hour. Thank you very much. And we will do our best to get the questions that you have still haven't been answered to Lucy and Alice, because we don't want you to finish this session empty-handed. And that does unfortunately bring our time to a close. Thank you very much for being with us. We hope that you found our chat on hybrid leadership being the future of leadership insightful and interesting. And if you would like any further information, we shall get it to you. Bye for now.